Good morning. How's it going? This is Geography 10, Lecture 6. Waitlist issues, I don't have any new news. I am amazed that there are this many seats available in the lecture hall, given the pleas that I've received by email from people on the waitlist. Okay, today we're going to continue our discussion of Alfred Crosby. I'm going to try to pick up a couple of points that I failed to get to at the end of the last lecture. We were talking about domestication, different ways of understanding what it means to domesticate plants and animals, where it happened, when it happened, that kind of thing. The last couple things I want to pick up from last lecture involve possible ways of criticizing Crosby's argument. Then I want to try to explain Pleistocene overkill. This is a rather famous, now widely accepted theory about the interaction of humans when they arrived in the New World and how they affected what are known as Pleistocene megafauna, some of those large animals, the mastodons, for example, that we saw in that picture last time. This is an important part of Crosby's argument, and we need to understand it. And then at the end, I want to talk a little bit about the bibliographies. Who has got a syllabus that they could quickly refer to briefly for me and tell me when the bibliographies are due? I'm sorry? The week of March 29th, and I believe are they doing section? Yes. So the week of March 29th, you're going to have to turn in an annotated bibliography, which will represent the research you have done in preparation for writing your research paper. So as part of lecture today, I want to talk about what a bibliography is, why it's important, how to do it, and why it is a part of the process of putting together your research paper for the semester. Okay? Are there any questions before we get started? Okay. So the readings for today: Crosby chapters 4 and 5. Next Tuesday, I will not be here, and you will watch a movie in lecture, Favela Rising, as I've said, which is about slums in Rio de Janeiro. For a week from today, I'd like you to have read pages 16 to 31 in your atlas, although much of the lecture a week from today will actually continue the discussion of Crosby. But you do need to read those pages from the atlas as well, okay? When we left off last time on Tuesday, I was talking about a variety of possible objections that might be raised right up front to Crosby's argument, as he had presented it in the opening chapters of his book, right? I talked about environmental determinism and whether this argument might be an instance of environmental determinism or not. I'm going to come back somewhat to that in a moment. We talked about cultural Darwinism, whether this argument essentially justified or naturalized the domination of one culture or set of cultures, namely European, or what became, in his terminology, Neo-European culture, over the peoples of the Neo-Europes, the peoples who were there before the Neo-Europeans arrived. Whether this could be seen as an argument that naturalized that by suggesting that somehow the Neo-Europeans were more fit, and that is therefore why they came to dominate over those who had been there before. And then I didn't quite get around to the argument, is this perhaps a great big tautology? What's a tautology? Anybody know? Nobody knows what a tautology is. Anybody taking logic? Does anybody take logic anymore? Any guesses what a tautology is? Anybody? Yeah. No, it's not an if-then. It's not an argument. It's a certain kind of that kind of argument, perhaps. But that in itself is not a tautology. That would just be some kind of inference or deduction. Yeah. A repetition. I think you're getting at it, but I mean, a tautology in the simplest sense is a circular argument. What's a circular argument? Yeah.
You get one thing, and then it causes A causes B, and then B causes A.
A causes B and B causes A, so it's circular in that sense. That would be one type of a circular argument, although that wouldn't necessarily be logically problematic if you had some kind of positive feedback, right, in which A makes B greater and B in turn makes A greater, which in turn makes B greater again, right? That's not exactly what we're getting at here. If anybody cares to like look tautology up on the web or something and give us a technical definition, that would be fine with me. Yeah.
In logic, tautology is a formula which is true in every possible interpretation.
A formula which is true in every possible interpretation. That's an interesting way of putting it. That's in logic. Okay. Anybody want to offer a guess as to how you might read Crosby's argument that way? I mean, the idea here is that perhaps the argument doesn't explain anything because perhaps it sort of is self-validating. Or rather, it's circular in the sense of, well, let's think about it in terms of Crosby, right? His argument is about one group of peoples coming to dominate over another group of peoples. And he purports to be offering an explanation of why that happened. But what does it mean to dominate over another group of people? Or over, what does it mean to dominate an area or a region in his argument? It means you're there, and other people aren't there, and you're succeeding in reproducing your society there. What does that consist of by his argument, on one reading anyway? I mean, he seems to be saying that what it means to dominate is to be there and to have the sort of suite of plants and animals and practices and technologies that enable you to dominate, right? You've got the plants and the animals you need to produce your food. You've got an environment in which those foodstuffs can be grown well. You aren't dying of all kinds of diseases. You are flourishing, prospering. Well, if the content of dominating is having these plants and animals and practices that allow you to dominate, and what he's saying is the Europeans had these plants and animals and immune systems and so forth that dominate in these areas, then in a sense all he's doing is saying they're dominating because they're dominating. Right? They're dominant because they're dominant. They succeeded because they define success. Now, I'm not saying that Crosby actually falls victim to this weakness. I'm just raising it as a possibility, something to think about. It's related to the possibility that this might be an environmental determinist argument, and also possibly to the possibility that it might be a cultural Darwinist argument. I'm just pointing out that if he's going to explain domination, domination has to consist of something more than simply the fact of dominating. Right? It's got to have some content, some substance that allows you to sort of differentiate between the causes of domination and domination itself, so to speak. Now, it would kind of like be, putting it in its simplest terms, it would seem to say the Europeans are people who figured out how to live really well in certain kind of climates, and therefore they dominate these climates because these are the climates in which they dominate. End of story. And that isn't a very satisfying argument by itself, viewed from a sort of logical perspective. That's all. So let's try to think about the details of this argument a little further. Oh, shoot, there's one more I've got to get into. And that's the category of race. And then I'll come back to why I don't think he actually falls victim to these problems. Now, the next couple of slides are in here in part because of Jared Diamond. And that is to say that in previous years when I taught Jared Diamond's book instead of Crosby's book, this was a really important point to try to drive home. How many of you have read Guns, Germs, and Steel? Okay, quite a few of you. The question Diamond sets himself at the beginning of that book is somewhat like the question Crosby sets, right? He says, why is it that some people have got all the wealth and money and power and other people don't? And why does it have certain patterns? And in a way, he's saying, why is it that the white people, whether they're in Europe, North America, Southern South America, Australia, seem to have all the stuff? And elsewhere, there are people, and Diamond sort of drives this point home by saying, he's done a lot of work in Indonesia, Papua New Guinea. He's met a lot of people who are poor. And one of them actually asked him this question, a sort of leader of a tribe, asked him, how come you guys have all the goods? And Diamond's like, well, this is weird. Why is it that these people that I know in these parts of the world, they're every bit as smart as we are? They're every bit as creative and interesting. I mean, there's no obvious reason why they should have. And he then goes on to say that he's going to make an argument that will wipe out any claim that somehow this is based in race. I mean, his agenda in the book is to somehow get rid of all last traces or remnants of any kind of racial argument about prosperity and the distribution of wealth in the world. And the funny thing about it is that he proceeds to write this 400-page long book, and he can't let go of race, even as he tries to transcend it. He's stuck in racial categories. And in many ways, even as he explicitly says it's not about race, the very fact that he can't stop talking about race seems to suggest that he hasn't himself actually transcended it. So this is still relevant for Crosby, if only because the sort of problematic he's trying to engage is similar, right? Is this argument somehow about the fact that white people were better suited to and came to dominate large parts of the world for reasons that had to do, somehow or another with their culture, their race, their whatever, their sort of essential being as biological organisms rather than something else? So what about race? And I want to quote for you at some length from the report of a blue ribbon task force assembled by the American Anthropological Association a little over a decade ago. And they devoted quite a bit of time, a couple of years, with anthropologists from throughout the discipline. So we're talking about social and cultural anthropologists, also archaeologists, biological anthropologists, people who have studied the evolution of hominids from the earliest times, people with expertise in material culture, genetics, you name it, right? And they were interested, this was a time roughly of some public debate in the US about race and academic performance, for example. And they were tasked with the job of assessing what exactly race is with respect to humanity. They said, in the United States, both scholars and the general public have been conditioned to viewing human races as natural and separate divisions within the human species based on visible physical differences. With the vast expansion of scientific knowledge in this century, however, it has become clear that human populations are not unambiguous, clearly demarcated, biologically distinct groups. So they're saying, in the public perception, race is sort of a natural category, right? And you can actually read race off of, say, a photograph. Diamond includes about 24 pages in the middle of his book where he's got these nice glossy photographs of people from around the world, like headshots of all these people, and it's all about, like, here's Nelson Mandela. He's black. Here's a primitive person from Indonesia, dark skinned. It's just like all these people. He's like, this is, on one hand, it's a sort of exhibit of human diversity. On the other hand, it's very much this kind of thing. Like, you can look at the picture and you can say that person is black, that person is Asian, that person is white, that person is Native American, that kind of thing, right? And they're saying this commonly held view that race is a biological trait of human populations that is based in or visible from physical appearances, physical differences, is not scientifically grounded. What do they mean by that? Evidence from the analysis of genetics, for example, DNA, indicates that most physical variation, about 94%, lies within so-called racial groups. This means that there is greater variation within racial groups than between them. Throughout history, whenever different groups have come into contact, they have interbred. The continued sharing of genetic materials has maintained all of humankind as a single species. What does this mean? Anybody know what they're talking about here? Greater variation within racial groups than between them? Anybody? Oh, yes. Yeah.
The answer yours takes it to white people. The genetic differences between them would be, oh man, it's actually hard to say.
Okay.
Like the difference between race isn't necessarily as big as between the same group.
Okay. You take 3 people, and you look at them and you say, okay, well, these 2 people are white and this person is not. You say, okay, great, that's race. Well, if you actually look at their DNA, the genetic makeup of who they are, the 2 white people's DNA will be more different from each other than either one of them is from the DNA of the 3rd person. Now, granted, DNA may not be the only way to think about race. But when you think about race in the context of the long sweep of human history across the world, and you think about the groupings that are associated with it or that are said to undergird it, right? The fact that we think of black people as having somehow come from Africa and that kind of thing. This is a fairly important way to think about it, right? Genetic makeup. This is the sort of code within which traits, whatever you wish to, both visible traits, your hair, your skin color, that kind of thing, but also invisible traits, susceptibility to disease, that kind of thing. This is the code in which that has been transferred down through the generations. What's this last part telling us? Yeah. Okay, divergent evolution has not occurred among humans, which is, I mean, that's the correct way of sort of putting this in scholarly language. The more crass way to put it is, what? No, that's not very crass, is it? Throughout history, whenever different groups have come into contact, they have interbred. They have interbred sufficiently to maintain us as a single species, right? Now, there are parts of the world in which the idea that different races interbred, parts of the world at different times in history, the idea that people interbred across racial lines was extremely taboo and frowned upon in the most severe ways and was supposed to never happen. But the genetics, the DNA itself suggests, well, guess what, guys? It happened. It's happened everywhere. Now, these facts render any attempt to establish lines of division among biological populations both arbitrary and subjective. Physical variations in the human species have no meaning except the social ones that humans put on them. Now, this, again, is a point that's much more important to stress if you're reading Gaiman than if you're reading Crosby. But reading Crosby, it's still there as a possible line of response or reaction to his argument. And these statements are perhaps a little controversial. I mean, do you agree physical variations in the human species have no meaning except the social ones that humans put on them? Race is not a biological phenomenon, not a biological category. That's what the Anthropological Association is saying. Do you buy it? Yeah.
In my Darcy Cross last semester, we read this article about how they were testing like medication for obesity, and they found that it worked more effectively in African American patients than Caucasian patients.
Okay.
But then they had to figure out whether that was like ancestry, rather than like biological genetic component.
Okay. Okay. That's a very good example, and actually, that's a very prominent example of the kind of thing that the Anthropological Association was actually concerned about. Right? Medical research frequently tests for differences across racial categories. Right? It's one of the variables they will build into study design. Whether it's the central focus or whether it's just another variable, background kind of variable that they collect. I mean, when they choose people to put in a clinical trial, they're concerned they might want to know their gender and their age, they might want to know their income, and they might just ask about race as well. Or it might be explicitly the focus. Like, let's see, does this drug work as well among African Americans as it does among whites or Hispanics or Asians, right? Now, that's an interest, because if they find that there is a significant difference, what do you do with that? How do you understand that? And the point that I think the anthropologists are trying to make here is be careful with that. It is possible that because of circumstances surrounding the longer-term conditions in which populations have lived and responded to, say, disease threats, things like that, that they will respond differently to certain kinds of drugs and certain kinds of germs, right? But to call, if you interpret that as a racial difference, you run some significant risks, right? So people whose ancestors lived in parts of West Africa are likely to have a different kind of response, statistically speaking, to certain kinds of diseases, sickle cell anemia, malaria, that kind of thing. What the anthropologists are saying here is that that's not because they're African or African American or descended from Africans. It's not because of their race. It's because their ancestors happen to have lived in a place where malaria, for example, had a certain kind of epidemiological, virulence condition, that kind of thing. And this can be a tricky kind of point to quite thoroughly grab. The risk, of course, is that you might look at that study and conclude, oh, okay, therefore, blacks are going to respond this way to this drug, whereas whites or other races aren't. When in fact, that's not the right conclusion. The right conclusion is people whose ancestors came from this part of West Africa will respond differently. People whose ancestors didn't, people who might be black but who didn't have ancestors there, will not. In other words, the explanation lies not in the racial category that's sort of put across the population of people in the study. It lies in the actual history and geography of groups of people who are not clearly demarcated by racial categories. Yeah? Good question. Good question. Good question. Through how many generations, over how long do certain kinds of susceptibilities or resistances to certain diseases persist? Right? If your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, had developed a resistance to a germ, plague, measles, whatever, is it still going to be in you today? And that's going to depend on a lot of factors, not only all of your other ancestors since that point in time, but also, how long does that kind of immunity or susceptibility persist in any given individual? Does it become a heritable trait? Is it a heritable trait to begin with, or not? In other words, does it really reside in your DNA, or does it reside in your immune system? And there are different temporal scales over which those levels of response change over time. Any other thoughts on this? It's funny, the anthropologists, when they brought this out, they didn't get anything like the kind of press that, like the Bell Curve, a book of about that same time got. A sociological study that purported to show that African Americans are worse students, are somehow less intelligent than white American students. And that book got all kinds of press, big controversy. This Blue Ribbon Task Force report from the Anthropological Association, despite having been the effort of a great many people over a great length of time, got almost no attention whatsoever. The message about what is the coherence or meaningfulness of any kind of racial category is an interesting and important one, I think. So, any other questions about that? No? Yes? Okay. So, I promised to come back and suggest that Crosby's argument is not tautological, and that it's not a case of environmental determinism. And I want to talk a little bit about this. The first one I want to talk about concerns winds and tides. Here's a map of the world depicting ocean currents. The red ones are warm, the blue ones are cold. My pointer still isn't working, I apologize. But you see, look at the North Atlantic. Now, I don't think we've actually gotten to this part in Crosby yet, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it now. We haven't gotten to the part about tides yet, have we? And winds. Winds? Okay. All right. I apologize. What's going on here? Anybody? I need my pointer. Look at what direction are those currents going in the North Atlantic Ocean? Clockwise. And you see where the Canary Islands are there, just off the northwest coast of Africa? And you see where Portugal is, right? He makes this argument. He's like, why is it that these European mariners